Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're here watching
What?
Newcastle Texas. And Assalamu alaikum. My name is Coach Wajid, and I'm here with our special guest for this afternoon, Dr. Abdul Haq Baker. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Our pleasure is to have you, and it's almost like default, For I've been doing this for so many years, it's always that you're listening to Newcastle Fast FM, but it's you're watching it too. Subhanallah, it feels so different. Alhamdulillah.
MashaAllah.
But
Alhamdulillah.
yeah, Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair for joining us, Abdul Haq Baker, for this evening, inshallah. We're trying to, or my purpose behind the next 3 days where I'm delivering these shows, inshallah, with people like your good self, inshallah, is to kind of help people understand the challenges and the difficulties people can go through, but also hopefully that from what your experiences and understanding is for people to get the right mindset to get the most out of this massive month. And I think in the first instance, Abdul Haq Baker, if you just want to, well, if I could introduce you, inshallah, you have a PhD in dealing with radical extremists, and you're something of a very sought after person who goes out there and really is able to find those issues that people of Islamic faith or otherwise that makes them vulnerable, and you kind of help sift and unravel that to help people get through to really redefining themselves. And you're able to really help people, and you go and you talk to and consult on a lot of people on sort of government level and things like that, inshallah. Is this that's how I'd introduce you, yes?
That's fine. Yes. And as a convert, I think being a convert adds another dimension to the experience that I bring to the table.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think especially as somebody who comes to Islam, it's a different way of approach and thinking. I think because like for myself and many of us who are born into the deen, we kind of take it as a given, we take it for granted. But we don't tend to always ask those deeper questions. We don't always tend to step back a little bit and ask, what is the purpose of this and what is the meaning of this and how does this really define me, or pinpoint what my faith is all about. So for yourself, what was your journey of the Haqq, and where did it sort of begin for you?
I think it's a good question. I think having grown up with my father teaching us and raising us as Roman Catholics, went down to Roman Catholic school, which was a culture shock for me because I was pulled out of a very cosmopolitan urban school, and learning as much as I had to do about Catholicism against my wishes was something that I think it left an indelible mark in the sense of structure. But then growing up and living a street sort of culture with my peers, as you do from the urban background, and getting involved in all sorts of activities and events and circumstances that we do. Many would know of that type of lifestyle from urban environments. I think that once Islam was presented to us, and to me in particular, seeing a structure that had an esoteric dimension that I would be connecting to God directly, not a partner, not Jesus, not a prophet or anything like that. This had a profound impact on my psyche. And we searched, myself, my colleagues, when we were searching, we wanted to make sure there wasn't any catch or caveat to this Tawheed, to this monotheism, as it is, monotheism. And we saw that it wasn't. It was the worship of one God. Now, that resonated very nicely and easily with me. Then we had to overcome, was Islam a cultural religion for Arabs and the South Asian community in particular? And through exploring and getting the Quran for the first time, the one Muslim that we knew who was part of our gang, if you like, and wasn't practicing, when he heard us having this discussion, he went and bought me and a few of us the Yusuf Ali translation of the Quran. And I think when I saw the short surahs, particularly Surah Ikhlas, that was, you would say, a game changer for me. Seeing the description or the pointing and referencing to Allah alone, and that Jesus was Lam Yalid wa Lam Yulad, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ, that he begets not and he was not begotten. Coming from a Roman Catholic background and not that not sitting comfortably with me all of my life, seeing this surah as well as Surah Fatiha had a profound effect on me, as well as the fact that the lifestyle we were leading, we had individuals, friends of ours who had died. It was quite a destructive lifestyle. We were leading a dual lifestyle. I was a lawyer by day, and by night I was doing other things. And these things formed a powerful concoction to make a decision there and then, which was, I want to worship Allah as He has ordered and desires mankind to worship Him. And Islam was that answer and continues to be that answer. Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. I mean, there's just so much. If we could just spend a little time unpacking that, Abdul Haq. So your profession, did you say you were a lawyer, yes?
I was a trainee lawyer by profession, working as a fee earner in Holborn, with over 200 of my own cases, instructing barristers and things like this, when Allah guided me to Islam. And it was interesting because working in that particular type of environment, wining, dining clients and going to court regularly, for me to declare openly that I'd become a Muslim would have been problematic. And so for 10 months, I think it was, I didn't tell my boss, who I got on very well with, that I'd become a Muslim. But they noticed changes. They noticed I wasn't shaving anymore. They noticed I wouldn't go to the pubs, wine bars, womanizing. That wasn't happening anymore. And it came to a head. I used to disappear at the prayer time to a quiet part of the building, an unused part of our offices, and pray there. And then Friday, disappear for a long lunch break to Jummah. It got to the point where I had to declare I was a Muslim. And when I look at it in hindsight, it's quite funny now, amusing, because I declared it around January, February of 91, which was not perfect timing because the Gulf War had just started and there was all of this Islamophobia that was raging against the Muslims. So that was the time I declared that I'd become a Muslim the previous year.
Yeah, and so at that point then, Abdul Haq, then did it, like, similarly to what happens a lot of Muslims in those kind of workplaces, you become the ambassador and the fountain of knowledge of all things Muslim. Is that kind of how it went for you, or was there like a different kind of response you had from your colleagues, especially like you said with the Gulf War happening? I remember at school when that happening, slightly younger than you. So I remember when it was happening at school and sort of the enmity that came from kids and, you know, peers and all the rest of it. What was that like for you then?
For me, I think at work, there was the initial anger from my boss because he saw me as a rising star. I was a black young man from the streets who was popular amongst colleagues and clients and everything. And then I'd become this more socially conservative, this reserved individual who wouldn't drink people under the table, wouldn't womanize as much as I was before. And they saw that. And that was a problem for them, as one of their stars or showmen, as it were. Family, it wasn't that bad, in the sense that my mum's from South America, and so she was familiar with a lot of Muslims, and she told me she used to feed us halal food from when we were younger. My dad, who's passed away now, who was a Christian, he wasn't happy about the change, and he thought it was something transitional that I was going through, until he realized that this was the thing that calmed his son down. My mum said I wouldn't have been alive if I was not a Muslim because of the lifestyle I was leading. Others said similar about my friends and I. So they saw that Islam had a calming, sobering sort of effect upon us. Some of our wider circle thought we'd gone mad. They look, you've got studios, you've put out records, you've got a nightclub, you're doing all of these things. And to give that up, they thought something had happened psychologically to us. But years down the line, them seeing how we progressed, seeing the success that Allah has blessed us with in our normal lives, let alone the extraordinary aspects of our lives, made them see that we had this conviction upon finding the truth that we're upon. So I wouldn't say the response was as adverse. Yes, a lot of questions would come about Islam, and that put us on the path to learning, because when the Gulf War had taken place, as it was taking place, extremism started rearing its head in some instances amongst the community that we were in Takfir and the rulers. And so we had to embark upon learning, And being a convert, we ensured that what we were learning was authentic. We didn't want to succumb to hearsay and spurious claims. We needed to see the proof. And I remember as a new Muslim being introduced to Sahih Muslim and reading, will you see Allah on the day of judgment? And the Prophet ﷺ saying, you will see him as clearly as you see the full moon. And this really amazing us. We were like kids in awe of these narrations. So seeking authentic knowledge remains a pursuit that I have up until this day.
SubhanAllah. So I think in some ways, there is a bit of awe and envy of those. I mean, I'm talking my own experience of being born into Muslim, of how much appreciation somebody can have coming into the deen, and their fervor can be so much greater than ours in the sense of seeking knowledge, of understanding it, and then of really, taking that pause to stop and appreciate, each verse or each hadith for what its weight and value and meaning is. And that sincerity that comes from connecting with an individual, like you said, because like from a worldly perspective, then, or from a sort of normal side perspective, you were there, you were being trained as a lawyer. That was a great profession, guys, sort of thing. But then you also mentioned that on the evenings you'll get to whatever you wanted to in that sense. So that was sort of a bit of a dichotomy of character, really, of traits. Of sort of one life, 5 o'clock, and then the other after that.
And that was actually captured by my boss at the time, the lawyer, and he said to me, the lifestyle that you lead, he said, in the daytime we know that there's a sort of white structured imperialism, the working class, the middle class, and everything. And he said, and you're in that. He said, but when it comes to the evening, we become dependent on you, in that you run everything. You run the nightclubs, you do the security, a lot of you, and he wasn't being racist, but he said, a lot of you are running drugs, a lot of you control the night. And that was a true statement, as prejudiced as it may have sounded, but I didn't take offense from that, because it was a reality. So I had a nightclub for a while. We held our own illegal raves. A lot of things were going on. Elements of criminality were going on. Elements which always underscored by that threat or involvement with violence. And so this was something that we were used to. That dichotomy was there. Doing security in the evenings at Hammersmith Odeon. Violence or the threat of violence was always close by, and that kept you on your toes. Your home not being safe. For whatever, be it the police, be it a rival, whatever. So these were elements that we were living. And I suppose for my colleagues and I, it was quite stressful as well, living on edge for most of the time, not all of the time, but living on edge most of the time. The postcode wars that are there now, they weren't as severe. But if I crossed into Surrey, for example, where we had white racism with the skinheads, if I moved across to North London and they heard that South London accent and they thought that you were dating one of the women in a particular area from North London, West London, there were tensions in that regard. So yes, there was a dichotomy of lifestyle, which alhamdulillah, in becoming Muslim, I was able to fuse things, not continue criminality, I hasten to add, but to fuse and make my life more comprehensive and not have to have those dichotomies.
Yeah. Then, I mean, I'm just thinking, because, well, like, again, just going back to that sort of stepping out and seeing the bigger picture kind of perspective, you could have kind of chosen any one of those two routes and just on that comfortable lifestyle. You know what I mean? You could have gone from your evening stuff could progress to something that was legitimate in a different kind of space, and you could have progressed into that. Your day job would have progressed into something else. So with all of this going on, you've kind of got a lot of what you would say your needs being fulfilled. Yeah, there was a risk element definitely with the evening and sort of turf and territory sort of spaces, but within all of that, when did you get the time to really sort of sit back and reflect? What was the kind of awakening or that moment where you were kind of stepping back and just thinking that, I'm kind of in this kind of matrix kind of scenario. I'm kind of in this computer game. When is it gonna? What is it really about? Because it takes a sort of self-awareness to be able to do that.
Very good question. And what I would say first and foremost is that yes, while I was satiating my mental needs, my physical needs, there was a dimension that was not being dealt with, and that's when I was looking back at Christianity and decided, no, I'm not going to go back into the Catholic Church, despite my Catholic school upbringing. But that we feed ourselves mentally, psychologically, intellectually. We feed ourselves physically, be it food, be it desires, man, woman, relationships. But I was not feeding myself spiritually, and that yearning and that aching was there, that I didn't know what to do in that respect. So that's when I started seeking. And I didn't go out. I've never been to a mosque before I took my Shahada. I've never been to a mosque. I only knew churches. So on one evening, the night before I took Shahada, which is March this year, was 30 years, alhamdulillah. And one of my closest friends was around my house. I bought my second home with my wife and everything. So finances wasn't a problem. And I was sitting there relaxing, drinking a glass of wine, maybe listening to some music. And he said to me, he's thinking of going to become a Muslim the following day. We'd have been discussing it for months about Islam and the original religion. And I was like, that's good for you. And he said, well, what about you? And I said, well, yeah, I was Christian. I don't think I'm going to enter another faith. Islam has a lot to say that is correct. But at my religion, our religion has been the street. What we do as a crew has been the street. So he asked me a few questions. He said, well, okay, you believe in God? Yes, I do. We believe in the day of judgment. I said, yes, I do. He said to me, what will you say to God then if he takes us now and then we're raised on the day of judgment? And I was dumbstruck. I got really frustrated with him. I couldn't speak. I couldn't answer that question. And he left and said, it was a Saturday night. He said, well, I'm going, there's a mosque that I've heard of. I'm going there anyway. And he left. I sat up all night in the same spot that he'd left me in. My wife came down. She didn't disturb me. She saw that I was really pensive, thinking. Then I asked myself those questions. If I died tonight, and we already had individuals who had died or come close to death and everything, what am I going to say to God, who I know exists, who I know created us? What am I going to say about not following him according to the religion that we know or believe to be correct? And that's what got me to say, I cannot move another day without submitting to him completely. And that's when I went on the bus. I didn't drive the following day. I jumped on the bus and I didn't know where the mosque was. I heard where it was. It was Brixton Mosque, which I subsequently became chairman years later, mashallah. And I made my way to the mosque, not knowing what the Shahada entailed completely. Was it just a declaration? Was it some initiation ceremony, hanging me out of the window in my underwear? I just didn't know, but I knew that I had to become a Muslim. And I shouldn't delay after that conversation I had the preceding night with my best friend.
Oh, wow. I think this I think this is fascinating. I'm sure for our listeners and our viewers, in the sense of understanding where you've come from, because it leads so well onto what we've discussed about what we wanted to put on this show, and that is where your specialism is. About basically helping misguided people move back onto what it is. And I think it's powerful to know that you've been through that process yourself, because I think there's an authenticity of your own journey that then feeds into not just the learning, the experiential learning, but also the academic endeavors that you've gone into yourself.
Absolutely. I think that's why I mentioned in the beginning, being a convert has its added dimension to it. And when I studied my PhD and wanted to look at the convert experience and our brothers and sisters from second, third generation background, and to find out what were the processes of our development, what are the things that influence us. So I looked at conversion theory and I thought, okay, some of that fits. But then I devised a 4-stage model and I applied it to not only myself, but to those I'd interviewed, to other wider cohorts of individuals, and resoundingly, individuals are coming back. So we identify with these stages that you've developed, Abdul Haq. And so, as you and I previously discussed before, the 4-stage model included from the very beginning the cognitive, I call it the cognitive development theory. We have that founding stage where the individual is now either looking back at their religion or they've just converted. And they have this belief system that is over encompassing, it's overarching, and it's the foundation upon which they want to move. They're very idealistic, very green, if you want, wet behind the ears, and very vulnerable at that stage as well, and susceptible to any message that comes to them. As I spoke to you earlier, I mentioned to you, with us, we were being shown Sahih Muslim, Bukhari, the Quran, tafsir of the Quran, being referred to the scholars, getting the right understanding. This was very powerful to us. Now, when we look at a parallel trajectory with how the individual who may have come and had that cognitive opening from a politicized perspective, from what was going on in Iraq, what was going on in Palestine or in Burma, that politicized understanding may whet their appetite for activism. However, is there that foundational tawheed understanding of the sunnah upon which to apply and contextualize what is actually happening to them in this politicized process? So that particular stage, I think many of us go through at various stages. You don't have to be a young man or a young woman. You could be in your 40s, 50s, where you get this awakening that things have to change. And then there's the next stage. Once you've been, you've got that resolve that this is the way that I want to be upon. Even in Ramadan, some may be feeling that now. You'll move to the second of the 4 stages, which is the youthful phase. What is that phase? That's a phase of idealism, activism, overzealousness, and you believe that your understanding of the religion from the previous stage is cemented. Again, it's a susceptible phase. Why? Because you have extremists and all sorts of bodies out there and individuals, entities out there who want to catch you at those 2 phases. Because if they can capture you and your zeal and your idealism at that particular stage, then they can steer you in the direction that they want you to move in. So these 2 stages, I think many of us need to look at that within ourselves, our children, and see how we can infuse and inculcate them with a contextualized understanding of what we're going through. I won't move on to the last 2 stages, in case you've got some questions you want to ask about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think what I would love for us to do is to explore those 4 stages over the next few weeks. And I think in the sense of the first part where you've mentioned, so it's about gathering data, it's information, yeah, and it's something that it kind of, let's sort of say, like a purist kind of approach to it, where you're kind of looking at things very black and white. Is that what it is?
Exactly. It's an abstract understanding, and if I can explain what that means by abstract, you haven't got that contextualized, actualized understanding where you're able to implement what you know. So you're hearing maybe or watching YouTube videos or listening to others speak about experiences that are within their paradigm, within their context. And because of your lack of understanding or your lack of absorption of the faith at that particular stage, because you're learning, you try and take that context that you've heard and seen in audio on YouTube and transpose it into your own particular lifestyle, which doesn't always add up. But we don't know that at that particular stage. We're like, no, this is how it has to be. If the Sahaba dress this way, I want to dress this way. If the scholar says you must be like this with the people in your society, I must be that way. It's a very abstract understanding at that initial founding stage.
Yeah, is the word evangelical kind of the word to use?
Absolutely.
Kind of
that? Absolutely. Yes.
Like very. An abstract idea where you're just trying to fit this peg.
Exactly. The second stage, particularly that evangelical, overzealous type of evangelism, and activism is what takes root, especially in that second phase. And you don't want to hear anything from anyone. So what happens? You will even fall out with family members. You will even chastise family members. If you're converts, you will cut off from family members because they're not Muslims. And we read the Quranic ayat and we apply them immediately onto them without any context. So yes, as you said, it's evangelical and very abstract.
Yeah, and I mean, because I appreciate you saying this, that this is kind of what Muslims take down, but obviously there's parallels that this runs along across different
All
factors.
faiths. All faiths, yes.
All faiths,
yes.
Yeah.
And not only faiths as well. If you look, for example, we have issues now in society with far-right extremism. If you look at the journeys of these individuals, the awakening they have, this is my country, why are we in this predicament? They listen to narratives of bigots who tell them it's because of the alien other, those Muslims, those black people, those brown people. So they start moving along that same trajectory, but from a different end of the spectrum.
Yeah, and it's a parallel journey that's being kind of trod upon in that process. I think the other thing that that sort of just wanted to highlight really is that beginning element of what knowledge is something that you take on. Like you said, you were kind of you were blessed to have a good friend to give you some good advice, whereas that quite easily could have been some misguided individual who could have given you that advice, and then because that's the track that you've got, and there's an affinity that you have with that individual who's connected with, and that's the path that you're more likely to take down. So there's an essence there around seeking knowledge and seeking knowledge in the best of ways. What are your you want to expand on that a little bit?
I do, and I'm going to be self-critical as well in this instance, in that when we're seeking knowledge, the knowledge has to be comprehensive, and it's got to be that which we can implement within ourselves first before judging and castigating others. So, for example, if we're learning about the prayer, is it just the rudimentary acts of the prayer that we are focusing on, which happens with some of us? This happens with us. Is there a spiritual dimension that we're nurturing, or is there an absence of that? Because we feel that the outward acts and the rudimentary acts are enough. We've got the beard, we've got the hijab and the niqab and the abaya and the thobe and everything like this. But what are we doing internally? So knowledge is something, as I mentioned earlier, when I came to the Deen and my colleagues as well, we were very careful about what we were learning spiritually, because as Muslims, we're very careful about what we eat. If I told you, go to that restaurant there and it looked very undesirous, you wouldn't go and eat there. If it was dirty, it was filthy, you didn't know the food was halal. So if that's the case with what we eat, what about what we are absorbing, ingesting spiritually? We need to check and ensure that they're not just hearsay or traditional or cultural claims that we are adhering to in the name of religion, or else we're falling to what we see said in the Quran so many times. We found our forefathers doing this and we're upon this. No, we need to be looking at the evidence, and those who are trusted in delivering and imparting that knowledge. And how would we know that they're trusted to an extent? We can see what they're referencing. And with regards to the Quran, the Sunnah, the context of the Quran and the Sunnah, and you can cross-reference to know if greater than them, greater scholars, classical scholars, contemporary scholars, are in alignment with what they're saying. Sometimes individuals feel that, oh, someone's bringing something new about the religion. The religion was perfected, as Allah has told us in Surah Ma'idah, set over 1400 years ago. So now we need the conveyors, the purveyors of this truth to share it with us, to impart it to us, and we need to be able to identify who they are. And Sheikh Google isn't one of them.
Yeah, I think that's the issue around where the true sources of information are, because like I remember a few friends and I say and all the rest of it. I remember the first time we got Sahih Bukhari on a CD, and our minds were just like, wow, we can get the Sahih Bukhari on the computer without carrying 10 books or so, you know? And it's that ease of information that because it's so readily available, like when you do a Google search, you probably click the first two or three, whatever, you won't necessarily look at references or what what impact does it have on that cognitive process of where how truthful that information is, and how difficult is it then to shift that afterwards?
I think that it starts with the learner, with the individual, and they've really got to examine themselves, their intention for learning, embarking upon learning. Are they seeking knowledge for knowledge's sake? Are they seeking knowledge to better themselves primarily and worship Allah better, to draw closer to Allah? If that's not the primary reason, then we need to question ourselves. That's got to be the primary reason for why we're seeking knowledge. Now, we've seen in this world of edutainment now that there are many entertainers, to be frank. There are educators and there are entertainers, and there are a bit of both in between. And they are appealing to audiences whose attention span is not like we were. The feeling you had when you got Bukhari. Imagine when I became a Muslim, we just had those green hardback editions of Bukhari with really bad typeset that we were reading, and we were really excited about this because of what it was saying, because of the content of what it was saying. But is that excitement there amongst the individual who's seeking knowledge now? Is that excitement there when he gets a book in? If he can't read Arabic like myself fluently, he gets that English book that has been awaited, this classical book or this contemporary book, and there's an excitement. But the excitement is because of what you are going to benefit personally. And that's when the transition comes about. The four stages that I've looked at, moving from that youthful idealistic phase, which is abstract, remember, moving to that adult phase, which is reflective, which is foundational, which is reviewing what the tenets and the precepts you learned earlier on and understanding them in a more contextualized, actualized basis, because you're now implementing them. You may have family now. You may have reconciled with your parents or siblings who you were very overzealous with before, because you now comprehend what that knowledge means in the real-time, real-life context of how we are living, not from 3,500 miles away in a different country or a different context that doesn't fit the context you're in. And once you can see that, I think you've done it, many of us have done it, and it's the same with the Quran. Every time we read the Quran, we are seeing something new because of its depth. And that's in line with, and I'd like to bring this other, when I went for dinner months ago with a colleague, business colleague, he shared something with me, which I share with my children now and colleagues. It's profound, and I want to explain it in this context. Like I've just mentioned, reading the Quran, imagine life as a building, okay? Now, as you go higher onto the next level, the next floor, you see a more broader horizon. You see a wider perspective than you saw the floor below. So I say to my children now, I say to my 11-year-old, I know what it looks like on your floor. However, your 16-year-old brother, your 18-year-old sister are seeing a different level, a different horizon to what you are seeing. So you have to trust them when they're advising you in that instance. And the older siblings have to show an element of understanding and mercy to my 11-year-old son, because they were once there and they know what the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th floor looks like. It's the same as when you review it from a more mature perspective. What you actually end up seeing is a richer context, which should be humbling and which should be enabling you to become better in yourself and to impart that to others. And that starts taking place, as I've said, at the adult phase. It's a maturer phase. The final one is maturity, when you've reached maturity and wisdom, where not only can you implement and are comfortable with implementing what you've learned and self-reflection, but you can share that with others and advise and impart to them. You are going along this journey. I've gone along that journey. Many go along this journey, not just Muslims. As you said, there are parallel lives where people are going along this journey. This is what it looks like. Be patient with yourself. Don't rush. Absorb the knowledge that you are taking in.
Yeah, if I can, I really appreciate the example because I've just kind of sketched a really bad sketching there. So it's kind of, you're at these different levels, right? You know, but
That's
when
right.
you're at that level, you're kind of looking down and you can kind of see
Yes,
somebody else coming up. But then you kind of look
exactly.
up there and you're kind of on this kind of scale of things where actually I'm kind of heading this direction. What can this person give to me to make that part of my journey easier? And what can I pass down to make that part of the person's journey
Absolutely.
easier? You know?
Absolutely.
But there's one other sort of example that jumps into my mind is so I watch a lot of sort of fitness videos and keeping fit and just generally sort of health and well-being and sort of building physical strength. And there's a word out there called bro science. Now, that's for people out there who show you how to do stuff in the gym, but it's bro science. It's not really science. It's just some dude who thinks he's worked it out and he's showing you, but it's going to wreck your joints. It's going to, it's going to hurt you. It's going to hurt the person next to you. You can't spot that stuff. It's not working. It goes against actual science, but they call it bro science. And it's really interesting because some of the better actual intelligent educators out there will go into that element of this is bro science and this will be the outcome of following this path. But ultimately, the person who's arrived there, or for myself, who's arrived at that particular, education type thing on YouTube or whatever it is, I've arrived there because I've decided to go on a particular journey myself. And I've decided, right, you know what, I'm going to get physically stronger. I'm going to get physically healthier. So I'm looking for those different avenues. And some of them are bro science and some of them are actual science. And they're two very different kind of pathways that I can end up or down. But yeah, there's one path that's just going to lead to some serious injury.
And that falls in line with what I was saying about those early rudimentary stages of an abstract delivery and understanding. And you've moved to that contextualized, actualized knowledge where I know what works. I've done this. This is the pathway that is the one that's safe, that will not cause me harm. If you didn't know of that or you were not exposed to that, you would experience, as you said, like many, the earlier one, damaged limbs, maybe not knowing until later on that those limbs have been damaged and being impaired somewhat. And at that point, it's too late. However, it's not too late to make that transition across to say, I'm going to go to this path now that I know what that path looks like.
Yeah. So just going back to the element that you eloquently highlighted, mashallah, is that there is an element that, like you said, we nourish our bodies, we decorate our homes, we create our environments, but there's a thing about nourishing and really rejuvenating the spirituality of things. And so when you were kind of sifting through it, or when you kind of look through your work, how you approach this, how do you help people untangle that from, like, right now, let's say I have not been practicing for 5 6 years. Okay, I'm going to go on there, found some stuff. All right, cool. I'm just going to start watching some stuff. What connects with me personality wise and all the rest of it, I'm going to start following that dude and just be on my way. How do you sort of work with that? Because it is an abstract idea. How do you start to unravel and untangle that so it's not so foggy or mystified?
Good question. The first thing that every individual needs to do, and we even need to do that no matter how long we've been practicing the faith, is we've got to really reconcile why we are worshippers of Allah as Muslims. That's the first point. Why are we worshipping Allah? Are we going to then find out things that we want, that we find easy within ourselves, or are we going to find out the things that Allah loves and wants from us? And once we look at that, then we start looking at what are the building blocks to move in that particular direction. So let's say you come to your cognitive awakening because of politics. And we're not saying there's no politics in Islam, but is it in the context that it's being driven to us? And is that going to make you, is it going to make me closer to Allah, better as a worshipper, more spiritual? And I mean, just focusing on politics in itself without worship, that independent, individual worship that is only between you and Allah, not the activism. Once we've looked at that relationship that we need to start building with Allah, then we need to start saying, okay, now I need to look to the exemplar of that, which is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we need to look at his seerah, understand his life.
Could you just read that last?
So yes, so once we
repeat that last, brother, just yeah.
Yeah, once we have acknowledged our relationship with Allah, we then need to look to his exemplar, which is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and how he worshipped Allah and how he taught and guided the Sahaba and mankind with regards to the steps, the building blocks, the foundations to worshiping Allah. And that means knowing his seerah. That means understanding his seerah. That means contextualizing it in our particular lives and becoming better in ourselves first and foremost. Many of us do things, many Muslims, I was one, where we feel I'm going to throw myself into the dawah to save the world, but we're not saving ourselves. And then there's fallout with the immediate individuals around in our family because there's elements of neglect regarding them. And then we ask ourselves questions when it's possibly too late. How did I get in this stage when I've been doing the dawah and calling to Allah? And you need to call to Allah within yourself first and foremost and get that foundation firm. And we can only do that, again, as I said, by looking to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam seerah, by understanding Tawheed. And many people talk about Tawheed as an abstract. But if we were to look at Allah's Asma wa Sifat and we were to start actualizing, let's say we won't be able to actualize all 99 plus 1. Let's say we thought about 4 or 5 of Allah's names and attributes and what they meant, and we implemented them in our day, we would see a profound difference in how we behave and how we interact with the wider surroundings of people we interact with.
Yeah. Wow, that's really deep, mashallah. And it is, I think it's because I think when there was something that I was listening to, and he was talking about this idea that generally, like for example, for men, he was talking about specifically that, you know, when things going on, we don't really internally reflect on ourselves, right? So we'll do something.
That's right.
Yeah? Whether that's food or drink, or there's an external stimulus to deal with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's that. So where do you begin to look at yourself introspectively, given the lockdown and that we are in a quite a sort of a condensed situation, because you don't necessarily have that Hira kind of cave you can actually go away and reflect in. But maybe we have got the evenings and the nights to sit and reflect. Where do we start introspection? Because you said it's very personal. You know, what is for you is not for me, what is for me is not for you, in the sense of what really connects us to our purpose, to our understanding, and to us as individuals connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So where does that introspective start to open without unraveling too much, if that makes sense?
Now, very good question, and you're absolutely right. In this time where we are on lockdown, some of the stories that come to mind with me are, for example, those of us who read Surah Kahf every Friday. When you look at the youth, the people of the cave, and they fled by choice. It wasn't enforced upon them. They fled by choice from an environment where there was shirk, policeism being committed, and they didn't like the infrastructure of the society in which that was taking place. So they fled to a cave not to another land, to a cave, to have that solitude. And when you think about that and how Allah discusses that in the Quran, that's very, very profound. And remember, it was youth, it was young men. So now we have to ask ourselves, we have an imposed isolation. Can we turn that imposition round and take advantage of it by really looking at how our lives were before this took place? So, for example, we've just come into Ramadan. How many of us elevated our worship and started really preparing for Ramadan, but as though we were in Ramadan? Like, I was talking to a colleague of mine, and we were talking, and he went quiet, and I said, what excuse do we have for not praying all of the Sunnah prayers? What excuse? What excuse do we have for not doing the one rak'ah of witr? What excuse? And we need to ask ourselves that question. Okay, I cannot go out now. I cannot do all of the activities that I was going to do. So with me not being able or not standing up to do these extra aspects of worship, that may be the case for many of us. Then we need to ask ourselves, why? Why? What is the problem? What stage are we at with the 4 stages? What do we need to do to get ourselves to that particular place where we are doing all of the sunnahs, because we have no excuses to do that? Preparing ourselves for Ramadan and entering Ramadan at the height that we usually reach in our Ramadan by the first 10 days or the middle of Ramadan, but reaching those before we enter Ramadan because we've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think it was about 3 years ago. Ramadan was a massive challenge for me because I didn't give up the caffeine fast enough. And then, so the 2 years ago, and the longest, mashallah, but I gave up caffeine months before, and it was like out of my system, flushed. I was clean of it. I didn't need it to stay awake. And subhanallah, then it's been, and I think this Ramadan, I felt has really, I've been caught a bit unaware because of the lack of interaction and the way that things have happened. But again, with young kids in the house, it's very easy to sit and say, okay, we're going to pray our sunnah first, then we'll do our farz, then we're going to do some more sunnah, then we're going to do this, then we can do that. And it's very easy to commit that time. And I think it's kind of, you have to consciously be aware to relax and release yourself of that running around kind of restriction that isn't there anymore. It's like you said, that it's not there. It's simply not there.
And we realize, as many, even the non-Muslims are realizing, we got accustomed to and actually subconsciously enjoyed that busyness. Ramadan in the UK is frantic, and everyone is complaining about how busy they are and enjoying it. Like, I was really busy. I've got to get back from home. I've got to cook my family. Then we're going to do Taraweeh. We won't do our full iftar meal until we come back from Taraweeh. Then we've got to get ready for Suhoor because Fajr comes in soon and everything. And now, were we just in love and enthralled by the busyness around Ramadan and not Ramadan itself? Because now we just have Ramadan itself.
Yeah. It's just that time now. It's literally the time in front of us, without anything going around it. And
we can make things become habitual now. If we were doing the sunnahs of Maghrib, for example, and the sunnah of Fajr, because we know about the importance of those sunnahs, the Prophet ﷺ never missed those. We can make, because I'm a working man, maybe at Zohar time because we're at work, don't have time to do the sunnahs. The 4 sunnahs before and the 2 sunnahs after. We can make those habits now. We've got time, not just Ramadan. We've had before then and likely after Ramadan to make these aspects of worship habitual. So we don't leave them off now. It's like, okay, I've settled into a groove, if you like, to be doing these. These are the things that we need to be looking at. We've got more time now to read. And I'm not going to say to everyone, oh, just read Quran, read Quran. Yes, we're in Ramadan, read Quran. But what books haven't you read that you've always wanted to read? How many books have we downloaded on our Kindle or we've got sitting on the shelf that we always meant to read? Read one book in the morning, Make sure we've got religious instruction, but read one book in the morning, another book in the evening, maybe two books you're going to read, and enjoy them. Enjoy that intellectual stimuli. And coming back to that privacy, that was private moment. Many live in flats and apartments, I understand that. Those who've got gardens or court, forecourts, just go and sit. Don't take anything with you. Forget your mobile phone or that tab or that social media connectivity. Just go and sit. I noticed when I went up onto my roof garden the other day, when my kid said it, he said, Abby, can you see how many stars we can see now? Because there's less traffic. There's less traffic and everything. And I was amazed. These things we take for granted. And when we reconnect and refocus on these things, then we truly start saying again, Subhanallah. Rabbana ma khalaqtu hadha batilan subhanaka faqina adhaban nar. Oh my Lord, you know the English translation. So we really then we should not become in awe with our busyness, in awe with how frantic things are. We should only be in awe of Allah, but we've got to give ourselves that time to focus and become in awe of Him.
Yeah, kind of what you call kind of an equilibrium point. What's been interesting here in Newcastle is noticed a lot more birds are flying around, and there's a lot more bird songs, and there's a lot more stuff. And around the back of the house, where the birds are all sitting on the edge of the house, and so like I have to shower with the window closed because there's just pigeons standing around. I feel a bit ashamed. I don't know what shower in front of a pigeon. What sort of person do you think I am? You know, but it's I tell you one thing I have found for myself though, and I think you're right in the sunnah thing is, you know, I've been praying my sunnah more before the fard, and it feels like the sunnah is a warm up, you know, and once I've prayed my sunnah, you're kind of warmed up. I feel warmed up, like I'm ready, and the fard it's just so much better, you know, and it's not something that I've noticed because I've not done it consistently enough over this period of time. So because I'm doing it now consistently day in, day out, I felt the benefit of that. Whereas, like you said, oh, it's Tuesday night. Okay, I've got to get this done. I've got to get that done. I've got to prep something for Wednesday, blah, blah, blah. And so the sunnah might get missed one night and then the next night. And that consistency of doing really, I mean, what is it, 2-3 minutes? You know, no more than 5 minutes, really. And it's that introspective reflection, really. It's a very powerful question. You know, what are you like when you talk about knowledge? For what sake are you gathering it for? The worship, for what benefit are you trying to achieve from it? Is it for your soul? Is it for your, the purification of your heart? Because if it's that, then the rest is all going to take care of itself.
Exactly. And for those, there may be those who feel I'm not there. I've got so much stress and everything, and I don't relate to what these two individuals are saying. The message to them, if I may, would be in that pain or in that strife and problems that you are having at this moment now, you can take as much time as you want and need to give that up to Allah, to cry to Allah, to vent your frustration, not to Allah, obviously, but to really get that out and turn back to Him, nobody else, and then see how you feel at the end of it. Yeah. And that may not just be one evening. It may not be one evening. It may not be two. You may have to unpack things to the extent that you realize the amount of damage that you have within you that has been caused to you, that has been done to you. But in the same way, you've got Him to go back to and to take all of that. And you've got time to do that. Lying down on your side, sitting down, standing up, sitting in the garden, sitting in your apartment, whatever space that you've got. If you've got people around you, that psychological reflection where you're not speaking to anyone whatsoever, but Allah is knowing that you are thinking about Him and your situation and wanting to get out of what you're in. This is the time. If there's no time, as the family member said to me, if there's no time, like if it's not now, when?
Never, I think. Yeah, you're right. It is a never situation. I think that's it's a beautiful point to finish on because I think it is about that pause and like you said, Allah knows what thoughts are going on here and you know what's passing through here. Allah knows it. So it's not like you have to show it. No, I don't have to Instagram it to get it
Exactly.
recorded in
Exactly.
some format. You know, I know that it's being heard and listened to, and I think it's interesting, especially you know for those of us who have kids, sort of questions that come about, and it's been interesting because we've been talking about Surah Ahad actually, Surah Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Allahu Samad, Lam Yalid wa Lam
MashaAllah.
Yulad. This is the touchstone of Tawheed. This is the fundamental thing that defines the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And
Yes.
all things come back to it. So
Right.
if all you pass all those tests, then yes, this is truly a definition of the creator of the world. And so I think with the children, it's been really interesting talking about that Allah is one and only. He has no partner. You know, he has no children. He was not born. And the magnitude of Allah's greatness is something to reflect on. You know,
Yes.
like you said, you know, even if you just went through the first few names of Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, Al-Mulk, yeah, Al-Quddus, and you just stop like just even at those five and just reflected on the depth of that, because being Al-Malik is not simply that it's Allah, you know, Allah's kingdom. Allah is more than just kingdom. It's the people. It's the ownership. It's the breeze that will only move a leaf by the command of Allah, and that
Right.
bird will only sing by the command of Allah. It's
Right.
that reflection. I think we've got that time to do. Really.
And we've also got to do as well. I think we're in a time and an age where that self-reflection is done in various ways. You've got those in the society now, actors and media personalities who like to do that self-reflection online. That doesn't need to be done. That shouldn't be done. If you want to share aspects of things, no problem. But also there's the other spectrum where we fail or refuse to acknowledge when we have done something wrong to ourselves and to others. There's an arrogance that's actually there. And we need to strip that away. I'm talking, I have to do it myself. We all have to do it. We need to strip that away because there's that denial, and you can see it on social media. We need to humble ourselves upon self-reflection. And we need to humble ourselves first and foremost before Allah. Because if you can do that before Allah, He will facilitate you being humble generally.
Yeah.
This is important. And instead of moving to that path where we haven't got time for humility, and then we're humiliated.
Allah. I think on that note, it's just coming on towards 6 o'clock. Brother Abdul Haq, Jazakallah khair for your insight, your time. May Allah bless us all. May Allah bless all our viewers and our listeners.
Ameen.
Ameen. Inshallah, next week, same time again on Tuesday, we'll follow up to the next stage, inshallah. This has been a wonderfully in-depth conversation. I hope you've taken as much of it as we have, inshallah. And thank you for supporting Newcastle Fast FM, inshallah. And we'll catch up with you next week, inshallah.
Inshallah.
And to our listeners and viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.